Live from New York City, it's the Gary Null Show. And now, your host, Gary Null.
Hi everyone, I'm Gary Null. We have a lot to share today. The latest on health and healing to begin our program, including a closer look at the immune stimulatory effects of ginseng, and specifically the polysaccharides, the natural sugars in it, from Keonhee University in South Korea, published in the American Journal of Chinese Medicine. But then we're going to play a clip from last evening's Tucker Carlson show, because though I disagree with a lot of the positions Tucker takes, on this one he is ahead of everyone in the media, mainstream media. They've been looking at where this virus, the coronavirus, actually originated. And they're saying that they have a lot of information now that it was intentionally developed. Now, intentionally for what? As a vaccine or as a bioweapon? We don't know yet. But what we do know is what we've been told has been lies by the mainstream media. Why? Why don't they want us to know that China was responsible for this and the trillions of dollars in damages, the tens of thousands of lives that have been lost? Why are they protecting China? Well, we're going to explore that today. First, we're going to have the clip from Tucker, then our guest who is here today. He is Joshua Philipp. He is an award-winning senior investigative reporter with Epoch Times and the host of the China Report. And he'll talk about the documentary that I watched clear through and his 10 years of research and what it shows about tracking down the origins of the Wuhan virus. We have brand new information today on this, including from Nobel Prize-winning discoverer of the HIV virus, primary cause of AIDS, Dr. Luc Montagnier, the Institut Pasteur. He has new information about how did the HIV sequence get into the coronavirus. He's not the first to discover this. The Indian research team did, but then pressure was placed on them to withdraw their paper. Wow. Is that like pressure was placed upon Dr. Seralini and his whole research team in France, down in Caen, France, when they found that when rats were fed for their full life, instead of just 3 months, that after 3 months, suddenly tumors began to appear, liver tumors, etc., mammary tumors. And initially it was published in the Peer Journal, then it was demanded to be retracted, so they took it out, but then they sued for defamation and won 2 times, and it was republished. So science is rife with corruption, with pressure groups from Big Pharma, and now you've got not just Big Pharma, you have the entire power of the Chinese government and how much money it pours into American institutions, even working with Dr. Anthony Fauci, as you'll find out, through the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease, that we're funding, we, the American people, are funding the Chinese 4-stage biological weapons or research lab in Wuhan. Why? Why would we be funding anything the Chinese do? Well, we're going to ask the questions of Joshua Philipp in that discussion. On our next program, there's no time today, or I would have done it earlier, we have an in-depth look at the person pushing the hardest for coronavirus, Bill Gates. We just thought you'd find it interesting knowing his background and all that he's been associated with and his eugenicist philosophy. What did he say in a 2010 TED Talk? You know, if we could have different types of vaccines, and those actually exist, and were discovered, they were secret, sterilizing women who are heads of universities. Top people, no, poor women in India, poor women in China, poor women in Africa, in the Philippines. So we explore all this, And this is a person who's given respect. Wow. Have we got some wrong priorities in who to respect? So that's what's coming at you on our next program. We've done already 3 commentaries this week, and we intend to do 3 next week. In any case, these are tools to help you. They're scholarly, they're well-researched, and they're vetted legally. So use them, share them, spread them. Now to the latest on health and healing. South Korean researchers investigated the effects of the polysaccharides, those are simple sugars or complex sugars, from ginseng, and on the activation of what are called NK cells, those are natural killer cells, and how they can inhibit tumors from being formed. In fact, and this was published in the American Journal of Chinese Medicine, for the longest period of time we found that by stimulating a person's immune system with all the different botanicals, homeopathics, diet, juicing, and even psychological de-stresses, mindful meditation, etc., we could increase the percentage of effectiveness of natural killer cells. And as a result, we had a tremendous success in dealing with early and late stage and terminal cancer patients for years. And I've used that same protocol ever since. And Chinese ginseng, which is an adaptogenic herb, helps with that. And adaptogenic means that whatever's going wrong in your system, it helps strengthen it. So strengthening our immune system is essential for helping prevent every disease. So just consider taking some ginseng each day, and that way you could help prevent metastasis via the activation of natural killer cells and other immune-related cells. And that's what this study found. From the University of Haifa, which is in Israel, published in the peer-reviewed Journal of Frontiers in Psychology, comes an interesting study. Dance with your grandmom during the COVID-19, of course, not during the COVID time, but dance with your grandma. Why? It's a unique study that examines dance movement therapy as a tool to improve your mood, promote exercise, and create closeness between grandparents and grandchildren. I thought that was really neat. Physical fitness and social connections can be difficult to maintain for some older people. But new research published in the Frontiers in Psychology shows that dance movement therapy may promote exercise and improve quality of life and deepen family ties between grandparents and grandchildren. So that's one more reason to do it. And this was done at the University of Haifa. And they had a group of 16 dance movement therapists met with their grandmothers for 3 free-form dance sessions. The goal was to determine how these sessions could affect each group and whether intergenerational bonds might be strengthened as a result. And the results also wanted to examine a potential low-cost method to treat issues commonly facing aging populations like depression and limited mobility. So this was good. So just if you're younger, dance with someone in your family who's older. It's all good, nothing bad. From the University of Leeds, which is in the United Kingdom, they show that paper towels are much more effective at removing viruses than hand dryers. Research due to be presented at the current European Congress on Clinical Microbiology and Infectious Diseases shows that using paper towels is substantially more effective than these jet dryers for removing microbes when still contaminated hands are dried. So that's important. Now, hand drying is important to minimize the spread of dangerous microbes. Forget the coronavirus, just any microbes. And since failure to remove them increases transfer to environmental surfaces and increases the opportunities for transmission and spreading. So the study authors investigated whether there were differences to the extent of virus transmissions according to hand drying methods. And they found, yes, there are differences. In fact, I would never recommend anyone use an air blower because what it's doing, it's blowing all the microbes in that room into your hands. Now, just imagine, have you ever seen a public bathroom that had a toilet seat? No. So every time a person defecates and you flush the toilet, it's like the toilet just sneezed, where there are hundreds of thousands of bacteria and tens of thousands of viruses go into the air. Those viruses, depending upon the movement of people, which will cause the viruses to stay longer in the air, could be up to 3 hours. So just imagine you're in an airport and you've had hundreds of men or women using bathrooms, and then they do a quick wash, generally never thorough, and rarely, if ever, use paper towels to flush the toilet, unless it's an automatic flusher, or to wash their hands. And then they put their hands under the air blower. You have millions upon millions of feces in the air. They're on your hair and your clothes, and they're going to stay there to shampoo and wash your clothes. And they're also now going to be blown all over your hands. So use one of those hand dryers. Then you don't need to wipe with toilet paper, because your hand's going to be just as contaminated. So don't use air to blow your hands dry. Use paper towels. Now, if you really want to kill the bacteria or viruses, it's simple. You put some alcohol in your hands or hydrogen peroxide, rub them vigorously like a surgeon would do, knuckle a sandwich into your palm and around, fingers on fingers, behind hand on top of the other hand, and do about a 60-second wash, rinse, and then put coconut oil on. Have a little coconut oil. Conditions the skin. It's also antimicrobial. Also, from GreenMed Info comes a research project here, and it's about English acoustic physics pioneer John Stuart Reid, and he talks about how music medicine can banish the blues or fear associated with coronavirus while boosting your immune system to help vanquish any pathogen. So what GreenMed Info is saying, in effect, is it's natural to have some blue moods in life. Look, we can't always feel good about everything. And it's a false notion that, well, it's going to be okay. It rarely is okay. You know, we have to deal with everything that hits us in life, and everything we didn't expect hits us. It's just like with the hydroponic house and the sprout house. When someone began 2 years ago to grow sprouts, I said, look, you're going to have everything go wrong. You'll have sprouts that get a mold on them, and you won't know what to do. Some sprouts won't sprout at all. And that's where your learning curve begins. Don't look at it as a failure. Look at it as a new gift. I didn't know that if I oversprayed and over-moisturized certain sprouts and microgreens, they would mold. So, okay, now you know. So you lost a tray of sprouts. You lost, $3 worth of sprout seeds. Not a big deal, but look what you gained. That was more than a $3 lesson you just gained, if you can use that. So that's true of everything. So don't be depressed or disappointed when you're learning, because it takes a long time for most people to master something. But once they do, they're generally very good at maintaining that mastery. There was you really should watch it. You should go up on YouTube and download the dance sequence of Fred Astaire in Begin to Begin with Eleanor Powell. And in a later in life interview, Eleanor Powell said that one stand scene, which is flawless, it took them 2 weeks every day, all day, and they'd put in 12-hour days, just to get the hand movements right. Just their hands. Forget how long it took them to do the dance steps. And so when you watch it, you don't realize how much effort went into that, just because you see it as a total. But what if their hands weren't in sync? What if the rhythm and movement of the hands didn't match their feet or their choreography? Mind you, Fred Astaire was one of the very few actors in Hollywood history to require one uninterrupted take, meaning in normal, like the Cotton Club, that disastrous film, when you would look down at, the feet of the dancers, then you cut away to the face and cut away the crowd and cut away the full body shot. But the full body shots were generally just seconds because so many mistakes happen. They go cut, start over, cut, 100 times. Astaire's choreographer and director wanted everything in one shot, meaning there's no cuts, there's no edits. So that meant that he had to have a take that was perfect. There was another time when, it was either Top Hat or Let's Stamp, one of those, where at the end, Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers, she's wearing this big white boa. They both go up the steps, circular steps, and then waltz out. And once again, and this Fred Astaire was telling one of my buddies who he used to have lunch with for years, him and a group of retired actors, that everything would go wrong. They had it perfect. They'd done the whole scene. And then just as they were walking out, these little parts of the boa were up in the air and you could see them. Cut, did it again. And according to what my friend said, Ginger Rogers had done that so many times over days, all day, that her feet were bleeding. So they would come in and wrap her feet after every take. They'd put Vaseline on it, and then they would wrap it in some kind of white linen and then put a white stocking over it. So it looked like it was fun, and she was having a great time and smiling. Well, just the opposite. It was a torturous process, and she mastered it. When we see it, we get the benefit of looking at something that could never have been done in one take. There's only one time, to my awareness, that anything was ever done in one take that was simply perfection. The Nicholas brothers, the greatest dancing duo, in my opinion, in film history. And they did very few films. This was where Cab Calloway was the orchestra leader, and it was one take, and they did it to perfection. And they were supposed to come in and do rehearsals. They didn't. They just did a take. Watch it. Anyhow, and also one other thing, watch, and again, it only occurred to me when I stopped watching and started, I had a Fred Astaire film and I put it on pause and I go back and say, that's what I thought. You'll frequently see him doing extra steps compared to the female dancers he had. And because they just couldn't keep up with him. There was one exception. One person who did the same steps he did. And that was Eleanor Powell. And now just a little bit of trivia, and it cuts back to this whole idea that using something as an antidote, in this case it's music medicine. And so when your spirits are low and you're going through some blues, watch something that brings your spirits up. Watch something. Nature films are great. And I don't know, it's been, probably 25, 30 years when I saw my first VHS. It was obviously a plane flying at relatively low altitude through the desert. And then they put a beautiful classical music soundtrack behind this. Then they had another one come out of the jungles. And then another one of the oceans. So each one of these was a whole series. And I would, after a long day, I would just sit there and I'd put this on, I'd watch, and it was just one of the most natural ways of relaxing and being appreciative of how beautiful our planet is and how wonderfully creative people can be. So put on some wonderful music, relax yourself, because that's going to help you overcome depression in that moment or the blues in that moment, builds up your immune system. And that's one of the ways that we can help with vanquish the pathogens, including the coronavirus, by keeping a weakened immune system up to being stronger. And a weakened immune system makes us very vulnerable to everything. Now, one last thing, and that's high glucose levels can explain why some flu patients are more severe in their symptoms. This is from Wuhan University in China. It's published in the journal Science Advances. And what they said, this team of researchers affiliated with multiple institutions in China and one in Germany, they found evidence to suggest a high glucose, there's your sugar level, can explain why some flu patients have worse symptoms than others. And so think of all the people who are overweight. Think of the people who are more susceptible to pneumonia and death from pneumonia and pro-inflammatory responses. Sugar feeds viruses. Sugar feeds bacteria. Sugar feeds yeast. So, if you're pre-diabetic or diabetic and you get infected with the coronavirus, you're more susceptible to having more severe upper respiratory tract infections, also heart attacks, and creating what is called cytokine, C-Y-T-O-K-I-N-E, storms, meaning massive amounts of inflammation. And when you get massive amounts of inflammation on the lungs or in the heart, you're going to die much quicker than someone who didn't. So sugar feeds that. So just stop taking in the sugar. We are 21 minutes into our program. We're going to take a break and come right back and listen to what Tucker Carlson has to say on new research and on this issue. On this issue, I take it issue by issue. He is absolutely correct. All right? And all of mainstream media got this one wrong.
Laboratory was used for research on some of the deadliest pathogens known to man. As it happens, this facility was not far from the so-called wet market where the coronavirus supposedly originated. Kind of an amazing coincidence if you think about it. Was it actually a coincidence, or was there a connection between the research lab and the outbreak? It seemed like a question worth asking. Unfortunately, we live in a political climate in which asking questions is greatly discouraged and obedience is prized. And so speculation about this remained private, mostly online. And then in February, Senator Tom Cotton of Arkansas said it out loud.
A few miles away from that food market is China's only biosafety level 4 super laboratory that researches human infectious diseases. Now, we don't have evidence that this disease originated there, but because of China's duplicity and dishonesty from the beginning, we need to at least ask the question to see what the evidence says. We have such laboratories ourselves in the United States run by our military, in large part done for preventative purposes, or trying to discover vaccines, or to protect our own soldiers.
Well, of course, everything about Tom Cotton's questions, the one you just saw, were valid. Was there a connection between the lab and the virus? We ought to see where the evidence leads, as he said. But the people who are paid to follow the evidence refused to do that, and instead they mocked Cotton as a paranoid lunatic. On CNN, serial plagiarist Fareed Zakaria dismissed Cotton as a, quote, far-right conspiracist. Zakaria compared Cotton's entirely legitimate questions to Soviet disinformation for the 1980s that claimed the CIA invented AIDS.
Tom Cotton, one of Donald Trump's staunchest allies in the Senate, suggested that the virus might have originated in a high-security biochemical lab in China. In the 1980s, I remember when the far left trafficked in rumors about HIV having been invented in CIA labs. The far right has now found its own virus conspiracy theory.
What a mediocrity. What a slander. Over at NBC, famed journalist Brian Williams also refused to engage in journalism. Rather than spend 10 minutes learning about the subject and making up his own mind, Williams simply joined the herd of other dumb people mocking a story they didn't understand.
Cotton has been criticized by public health professionals for giving just the whiff of credibility there on television and on social media to a conspiracy theory going around that the coronavirus originated and was perhaps man-made inside a lab in China, perhaps even as a bioweapon, and was released either intentionally or unintentionally deployed. There is no evidence to support that.
There is no evidence to support that. Sounds authoritative. Actually, Brian Williams had no idea what he was talking about. At the time he said that, the evidence indeed was accumulating. The Wuhan wet market they're always citing, it turns out it didn't even sell the variety of bats that carry COVID-19. Those bats were hundreds of miles away. A group of Chinese researchers confirmed this fact in January when they interviewed 59 people who worked in the market or shopped there. And that information was widely available. It was online when Williams made what he calls his broadcast and issued the airy dismissal you just saw. He just didn't bother to read any of it. None of them did. Tonight, Williams and all the little robots like him owe you an apology. Fox's special reporters confirmed that government sources with access to highly classified intelligence, informed people, believe this virus did in fact originate in the biolab in Wuhan. The first infected patient was likely a lab employee who accidentally contracted the virus and then spread it to the rest of the world. That wet market theory, it was just a cover. China pushed that story to Western media to deflect blame from itself, and of course our press corps, as they always do, ate it up immediately. We still do not know conclusively this virus escaped from a lab in Wuhan, but tonight we can say with ample evidence that it is the most plausible explanation for the epidemic now wrecking our country. And that's a big story. Why didn't we know this sooner? Well, there is a specific reason for that. The people who bring you the news were lying about it, and they were covering for China. In February, the New York Times announced that Senator Tom Cotton repeats fringe theory of coronavirus origins. According to the Washington Post, quote, Tom Cotton keeps repeating a coronavirus conspiracy theory that was already debunked. Really? By whom? On March 5th, Vox.com weighed in, quote, rumor is the coronavirus started in a Chinese lab. Here's how we know it didn't. In their signature smug, haranguing tone, Vox said, quote, on Fox News and social media, a dangerous conspiracy theory about the origin of coronavirus won't die. Why was it dangerous? They never explained. As proof that coronavirus could not have escaped from that lab in Wuhan, Vox said that the lab had the same safety protocols as top American labs, meaning naturally the virus just couldn't escape. It was unthinkable to them that maybe China's safety practices might be different from ours and perhaps inferior. This is mindless, this is dishonest, this is infuriating. This story matters. They intentionally obscured it. In fact, State Department emails from 2018, 2 years ago, reveal that the Wuhan lab had disastrous safety practices. Even then, American officials worried that a deadly virus might escape from that lab due to Chinese incompetence. They put that on paper. But Vox, meanwhile, was quoting the World Health Organization's Bruce Aylward to assure you that any such talk was crazy and immoral and probably racist. This is the same Bruce Aylward, by the way, who has now become a professional shill for the government of China. In one interview that we played a couple weeks ago, Aylward refused even to acknowledge the existence of the nation of Taiwan. Why? Because his masters in Beijing might disapprove. Vox's article on the Wuhan lab ended this way, quote, we'll need to be patient for Chinese investigators to get to the bottom of it. Right. Let's let China do the reporting for us because they're objective. It's hard to believe any of this is real, but it is real, and we shouldn't be surprised by it. These are dogmatic defenders of the Chinese government posing as American journalists. They're the very same people who promote travel bans to North Carolina, then fly off to Beijing for green energy conferences. These are the ones who run Central Committee press releases as news, as CNN did yesterday, and kill stories critical of the Chinese government, as Bloomberg has more than once. They censor movies and silence their own employees to keep China happy. Hollywood specializes in that. And they filled our universities with the offspring of Chinese oligarchs, displacing our own children. They've outsourced our prosperity across the Pacific Ocean, and they've gotten rich while doing it. So, of course, they're repeating China's lies about this pandemic. They've been training for this for years. Will they be punished? We don't know, but remember their names. You should also remember the people who told the truth about all of this when it was unfashionable to do so. And Stephen Mosher is one of them. He was on this story months ago.
That was last night's Tucker Carlson, and on this issue, he is right. Now let's see someone else who has done what, in my opinion, is the best documentary up to this point on exposing the truth about where this virus originated. And he is Joshua Philipp. I gave you his bio at the beginning of the program as award-winning senior investigative reporter for Epoch Times in New York City and host of the China Report. and his newest documentary is tracking down the origins of the Wuhan virus, which is based upon much of his research into the origins of COVID-19. The film can be viewed on YouTube. Nice to have you with us today, Joshua.
It's a real pleasure being here. Some big topics to go into.
It is. Let me just give a few of the statements that we're seeing now, and then I'd like for you to address these, please, and then give us some context on what you found in your research on the origins of this, and especially in light of the fact that every statement you made, you supported with an official document or scientific study, and frequently these studies are not reviewed by the World Investigative Reporting Group. This is from Robert F. Kennedy, and chairman of the Children's Health Defense. The U.S. government $3.7 million grant to Wuhan lab at Center for Coronavirus Outbreak. The question then is, why would we be funding to the point of $3.7 million the Chinese? Why can't they do their own research? And this was all through Dr. Anthony Fauci's National Institutes of Allergy and Infectious Disease. That's an issue that is not being discussed. And also another clip here that went into depth about beyond predatory. Let's start with that. Let's go into, tell us the background that you found about the Wuhan and the woman who did all the research on this and some of your conclusions. The forum is yours.
So, of course, when we set out to make this documentary at Epoch Times, it was looking at an issue I think I was experiencing, most of us were experiencing, which is that, we're being bombarded with information. A lot of it is contradictory, sometimes even from the same sources. We hear one thing today, another thing tomorrow. The information coming out of China does not seem to be reliable. Normally, we could depend on international organizations like the WHO, but they seem to be repeating a lot of what the Chinese Communist Party says without proper verification. And so on multiple occasions now, they've given us false information. And so what is the real story? What can we prove? That was the kind of idea that set off this whole documentary. And so we actually are careful. We try not to draw any hard conclusions. We do have some experts we interviewed who have their own viewpoints, and we present those viewpoints. But we try to follow multiple paths of investigation. Did it come from the marketplace? Evidence suggests no. Did it, of course, that seafood marketplace. Did it come from this laboratory? Very, very possibly. And, of course, we note this, one of the main researchers there, this Dr. Shi, who just happened to be one of the top bat coronavirus researchers in the world, and notably was famous for finding a bat coronavirus that could transmit to humans without the need of intermediary species, and two, for, quote, unlocking the key that would allow her to, find ways to infect these viruses, make them human transmittable, basically allow them to infect human cells. And, she was famous for this. Why is this not being looked into? Why is it only now it's being looked into? I think these are, serious questions the world needs to be asking.
In Columbia Journalism Review, they have an article by John Alsop. It's called China, Conspiracy Theories and the Murky Coronavirus Origin Theory. Quote, yesterday, Josh Rogan of the Washington Post published a column that appeared in the paper's Global Opinion section, but contained bombshell new reporting. Rogan, in early 2018, stated officials from the U.S. Embassy in Beijing repeatedly visited a laboratory in Wuhan where researchers were studying coronaviruses in bats and their possible transmissibility to humans. Embassy staff were so concerned about safety issues, they said they had observed on their visits that they sent 2 warnings back to the State Department urging the U.S. government to give the lab support. In the first of the cables, which Rogan obtained, officials warned that the lab's work on coronaviruses, quote, represented a risk of a new SARS-like pandemic, end quote. 2 years later, with a new SARS-like pandemic sweeping the earth, the warning cables, quote, have fueled discussions inside the U.S. government about whether this or another Wuhan lab was the source of the virus. So, your thoughts that the U.S. government, at least the national security agencies, the White House, the president's intelligence briefing expert all knew that there was a big problem at the Wuhan laboratory, the one that this woman works at and many others work at, and none of this was taken any further. It was just dropped. Your thoughts on the negligence that we have displayed in not being aggressive and trying to determine where this virus originated?
Well, I think that the world needs to hold the Chinese Communist Party accountable. Of course, they came up with this whole seafood market narrative. That was disproven. Patient zero had no connection to it, and it's shown now that the entire course of the Chinese Communist Party trying to verify it had a lot of very underhanded means tied to it. The most likely case is this virus lab, which did have security issues, which people were warning about going back to 2018, and which notably, as we mentioned in the documentary, even had whistleblowers coming out who used their real names and said there are poor security protocols and this virus came from our laboratory. And so why was this not being looked into? Well, it seems that there is a very large push to label anybody who tries to look into it as conspiracy theorists. And, I think the question of why this is just as serious as figuring out where it did come from, because it seems that there's a lot of different organizations that somehow have it in their interest to prevent the facts from coming out when it comes to this. It is possibly because the Chinese Communist Party has, some influence over these things. I mean, who knows what the real reason is. But yes, I do hope that the U.S. government looks into this more seriously. And yes, going back to 2018, they had already warned about this. They'd already noted that there were security issues at that laboratory. And so hopefully they don't pander to the Chinese Communist Party, and I don't think they're going to, and look into this as a serious, avenue of inquiry.
I hope so, but I'd like to ask you a little separate series of questions, and this involves something that we're all faced with. Just a few facts. As of this week, 5.2 million more people in America filed for unemployment. That brings the total up to 22 million who are newly unemployed. Add that to the off-the-books numbers, not 3.4% or 3.3%, but closer to 20 to 22%. And now you're up to 15 and 20. Let's just be conservative, 15 and 20. You're up at 35% unemployment in the United States. The height of the Great Depression, it was 25%. And now we're hearing from people, including even the mainstream people like Goldman Sachs. Goldman Sachs just this week said in their advanced economies around the world are shrinking by 35%. And this is from Jason Glenfield from Bloomberg, and he's saying, based upon Goldman Sachs statistics, if you shrink the world economy by 35%, the entire world is bankrupt, and Americans in particular. These people are at home because of either fear of contagion by the COVID virus or because they may have it. In any case, small businesses are gone. Probably 80% of all small businesses will not reopen because the landlords are not given a grace period, putting a moratorium on rents. The salaries of people, and they were barely getting by with the salaries they had, what are they going to buy food with? And the COVID virus has not covered treatment under any of these current medical plans, so they're going to go bankrupt. So you can realistically expect greater bankruptcies than any time in American history, probably more bankruptcies this coming year than the last 30 years combined. China should be held accountable, and that's not even in the discussions right now. Also, for those who are in the health field, I'm finding out that a lot of health food stores are going bankrupt because there's not enough supplies going to them. Why? Because a lot of these original materials come from, you guessed it, China, the largest producer of vitamin C. They're finding out in their own labs that vitamin C works, along with ozone. Now, Italy and Spain are starting their own ozone vitamin C therapies. So there's not going to be enough for manufacturers. If there's not enough for manufacturers, then where are the products that have all that vitamin C? They're going to be gone. So I'm projecting about 30% of all the manufacturers going out of business in the health food stores as well. So the few products that will be available compared to what those at least made with vitamin C, compared to before of this pandemic, is going to mean millions more out of work. That's not even the existing equation. We're only talking about people who are currently not going, that are going back to work, we assume, who are just unemployed. No, they're not going to be any jobs. Now, then the last thing I want you to talk about is Martha Stewart was convicted of lying about insider trading. She was never found guilty of insider trading. She went to prison, and her reputation was forever destroyed. Here you have a country that under official policy has internment camps with minimally of over 1 million Muslims, Uyghurs also, and Falun Gong, which is not a religion, it's a meditation group, and they've estimated, I've spoken with members of the group, upwards of 100 million people have been persecuted, many put into prisons. In fact, I found an archival show where we did with one of the spokespersons for the group about 15 years ago. They were putting them into military hospitals so they could harvest their organs, and they talked about how you can harvest eyes, lung, a kidney without killing the person. And when you think of that, that's something dystopian. And that's been going on ever since. Human rights don't exist. Freedom of speech and freedom of assembly don't exist. Forget the virus. It doesn't exist. Social shaming does exist. And now they want to do that. Bill Gates is now working with other groups to give us a vaccine and a nanotechnology vaccine. And they can go door to door and see whether or not you've got have had your vaccine. And then if you do have coronavirus, you would get a card, and you would have to have the card to show either you had it, the antibodies to it, or weren't vaccinated. And that would allow you access. Then Apple and Google just this week announced that they're going to combine their efforts so that anyone who is known to have that virus could be identified by anyone else on their cell phones, just like the Chinese do. If someone's been caught jaywalking, suddenly everyone on that subway, airplane, or anywhere else they're at, their phones will ring, and that person's picture and their so-called crime is identified. We're now following that Chinese model. So why in the world, if you would put a woman who lied about insider trading in prison, why would you continue to praise China, defend China, do business with China, when it is such a reprehensibly vile country with official body politics that embraces genocide? Those are my personal thoughts. You can challenge them as you will.
I fully agree with you. The Chinese Communist Party not only has a system that goes against every single value we claim to uphold in the United States, whether you're conservative, whether you're liberal. They are abusive, extremely abusive of their own people. Muslim Uyghurs, slave camps, using them right now as we speak. There's some pretty terrible reports about them shipping them into virus epicenters to work in the factory. There have been reports about this. Yes, live organ harvesting of Falun Gong practitioners. People trying to be good people, believing in truthfulness, compassion, and tolerance, and being told by the Communist Party that their beliefs are antithetical to the atheistic views of the Chinese Communist Party, and so they're killed. They're tortured. Tibetan Buddhists having their temples torn down, Christians having their churches torn down. This is a totalitarian communist regime that opposes American values at every single step, and that is even very open in its hatred of America, in its hostility towards America and everything we stand for. And so if we claim to believe in human rights, well, we're doing business with and propping up one of the biggest human rights abusers that history has ever seen. Hundreds of millions of people. If you include Falun Gong, if you include the Uyghurs, and if you include the 100 million Christians in China, hundreds of millions of people persecuted. And somehow they have this painted facade that suggests otherwise, that they're some rising country, that they're somehow valid on the world stage, that we're letting them into the human rights organizations of the United Nations. How is this happening? And yes, you're right. It is corrupt politics, in my opinion. Corrupt politics and corrupt business. And I think both of these need to be held accountable. And yes, we're seeing now, right now in the world, a collapse of international industry on one side. And we're also seeing an expansion of government power on the other side. The world after this virus can be a very different place. We could be living in a totally different world. Personally, I'm hopeful on two things. One, I'm hopeful that the model of totalitarian governance that is shown by the Chinese Communist Party right now as we speak, and what they're trying to export under what they call the China model, will fail. It is failing, and I hope people see it for what it is. It does seem that that's the case. It does seem the world is waking up and are no longer afraid of calling out the Chinese regime. Even Iran, one of their closest allies, is calling out the Chinese regime for its cover-up, for lying to them, and for providing false information that made the situation in their country much worse as it currently stands, for using mask diplomacy, for withholding medical supplies, for hoarding PPE, protective gear, and shipping us, subpar quality stuff that falls apart when people touch it. In other words, medical workers in all parts of the world that are buying equipment from China are finding that they are now unprotected, that their lives are at risk because they have bought poor quality goods from China. Now we're seeing as well in the U.S., again, as you mentioned, maybe 25% unemployment. I mean, even higher than that, actually. What does this mean going forward? Hopefully we'll pull out our factories from China. Hopefully we understand now that we cannot rely on them. Hopefully we understand now that, as happened with our mask companies, manufacturing goods that we need during times like this, that if they're in China, the Chinese Communist Party can nationalize them and forbid them from selling to their own country of origin, as they did. And so hopefully when this is all said and done, we'll see a bounce back, and we'll see a bounce back in a way that has a better future than what we were living in, a better situation than what we were living in, because maybe businesses will return to America. Maybe each country will start caring more about its own people.
Let's hope so. Joshua, I'd like to play about 9 minutes of your documentary that I highly recommend people watch, and they can watch it on YouTube. Are you up for about a 9-minute segment here?
Yeah, I'm all for it. Thank you.
Good. Okay. Jesse in New York, and people can watch this going to prn.fm right now during our discussion. This is a short segment on tracking down the origins of the Wuhan virus, which can be seen on YouTube, and it's narrated by Joshua Philipp, my guest.
Wuhan is the capital of Hubei province, the largest city in central China. Huanan Seafood Market is located in Jianghan district of Wuhan City and is a large, comprehensive market that includes pork and a variety of frozen seafood, flavored spices, as well as some game meats. The first thing that received public attention about the epidemic was an internal notice from the Wuhan Health Commission. There has been a continuous occurrence of pneumonia cases of unknown cause. The notice issued on December 30, 2019, clearly required all medical units to report similar cases of unknown pneumonia. The notice started spreading online, and on December 31, 2019, the Wuhan Health Commission issued a public notice for the first time, saying that some medical institutions found a link between the pneumonia cases and the Huanan Seafood Market. However, the notice pointed out that there was no evidence of obvious human-to-human transmission and no infection among medical personnel. On January 1st, 2020, the Huanan Seafood Market posted a notice of closure. This was followed by a thorough cleanup of the market, which as an investigative reporter seemed rushed. Guan Yi, a well-known Hong Kong expert, echoed my concern that the move was like destroying a crime scene. Since then, Wuhan officials have repeatedly said that most cases of pneumonia in Wuhan have a history of exposure to the Huanan Seafood Market. On January 26, the Institute of Virology of China CDC announced that 33 of the 585 environmental samples from the Huanan Seafood Market were found to contain the novel coronavirus nucleic acid, and the virus was successfully isolated from the positive culture samples, suggesting that the virus originated from wild animals sold at the market. At this point, Huanan Seafood Market being the source of the epidemic became an official conclusion. A few days later, however, a report from the journal Science published online challenged that story. The report cited a paper in The Lancet, one of the world's top medical journals, and questioned whether Wuhan's novel coronavirus pneumonia could not have originated at the market. The paper, titled Clinical Features of Patients Infected with 2019 Novel Coronavirus in Wuhan, China, was published in The Lancet on January 24. The first author of the paper is Huang Qiaolin, Deputy Director of Jinyintan Hospital, the first designated hospital for treatment of unknown pneumonia in Wuhan. Why would this come as a challenge to the official narrative?
I think this journal article is very important. It reveals a lot of important information. For example, this paper talks about the first patient onset was actually on December 1st. these patients were not related to Huanan seafood market. And also no epidemiological association was found between the first patient and subsequent patient. And then also on this paper I talk about on December 10th, there were 3 more onset cases, 2 of which were not related to Huanan seafood market wholesale. Major discovery is that a total of 41 patients were counted in this paper, and 14 of them proved to be unrelated to the seafood market, accounting for more than 1/3. No one sells bed at the seafood market too, and the official from CDC didn't mention they find any beds in the seafood market too.
Certainly the Lancet paper showing that supposed patient 0 was nowhere near the market. Secondly, that there are no bats in the seafood market or anywhere close. The idea of the spread so fast through a population, just the way it was said through the seafood market, is highly unlikely and improbable.
On January 29th, The Lancet republished an analysis of 99 confirmed cases at Jinyintan Hospital, of which 50 had no history of exposure to the seafood market. According to the New England Journal, of the 425 cases confirmed, 45 cases onset before January 1st had no history of exposure to the seafood market. Notably, the authors of the 2 Lancet papers in the New England Journal of Medicine are doctors and medical experts in mainland China. Daniel Lucy, an epidemiologist at the University of Georgetown, said in response to the Lancet paper that if the data were accurate, the first case would have been infected by the virus already in November 2019, because of the incubation period between infection and symptoms. This would mean that the virus was quietly spreading between people in some parts of Wuhan before the cluster of cases with a history of exposure to Huanan seafood market began on December 15. The first expert group from the National Health Commission arrived in Wuhan as early as December 31st, 2019. The expert panel established a set of diagnostic criteria after investigating Jinyintan Hospital of Wuhan that stipulated a history of contact with Huanan seafood market, the person having a fever, and displaying the whole genome sequence. All 3 standards have to be met to confirm a case. This standard was used until a second group of experts, including Zhang Nanshan, arrived in Wuhan on January 18th and made a revision. Why did the panel impose a history of seafood market exposure as a criteria of diagnosis, knowing that at least 1/3 of the cases were unrelated to the seafood market?
They clearly know about 14 patients not related to Huanan seafood market at all. That clearly means another source of outbreak. I think somehow this could be a malfeasance or somewhat intentionally cover up some important source of infection.
It can go a long way to covering up the actual source by imposing a false place and you're not looking at the actual victims. Then you're only allowed to find your keys under the light post.
The numbers that we're getting from China about new infections and deaths are highly suspicious. We know that Beijing, for 6 weeks in December and January, suppressed information of the epidemic. And then when they officially acknowledged it on January 20, they then started a campaign of suppression of information. We know that because the central leading group that was announced on January 26 has a 9-person roster, and it's very heavy with propaganda officials. Indeed, the vice chairman of the group is the Communist Party's propaganda czar. It appears that the party's main goal here is suppression of information, controlling the narrative. Okay. That's more important to them.
That's just a short little clip from the film, and I hope that over the weekend you all take the time to download it off YouTube, tracking down the origins of the Wuhan virus. Final thoughts today, Joshua?
Yeah, well, I hope that this documentary can at least, this is my hope, really serve the function of providing people with a packet of information that they can take and begin looking deeper into this. I hope this is a stepping stone to finding out what really happened, and I hope that this information does prove valuable to people.
It will. It's an outstanding film, and I commend you for the good work that you and your team put into it. Joshua Philipp, award-winning senior investigative reporter with Epoch Times. I'm Gary Null. Thank you all for listening and have a good day.